Hello there and welcome back. In the last video we explored how learning happens and introduced some significant factors that underpin successful learning using Race's ripples on a pond theory. Can you remember the 6 factors? To progress, we'll begin to discuss what strategies a coach has at their disposal to enhance learning. In part 1 video, we will focus on the short term, the here and now, and how coaches can enhance learning from session to session. As we progress to part 2, we will look more to the long-term strategies. So, the here and now. If we jump back to the video planning, bringing it to life one day at a time, we introduced Bob Muir's diamond diagram. We'll use this to build a pedagogical framework, or put simply, a system of learning enhancement that coaches can simply identify, connect with, and use in their day-to-day practice. If a coach's planning is appropriate, suitable expectations will be set about what they want their participants to learn. From then on, it is simply a case of allowing learning to happen, isn't it? Easier said than done. As we said earlier, coaches only have 2 types of pedagogical tools in their toolbox to make learning happen. First, how they behave, and second, the activities they design and provide to their participants. I think it's important to start with how a coach behaves in a learning environment. With younger kids especially, this can have a substantial impact on the child's perception of them and be either positive or detrimental to learning. This has been covered in detail in MOOC 1, and Sergio will cover the main tools in the coach's toolkit in the next section. So let's go straight to the pedagogical tools we can use to maximize learning. In 1986, Sina Good and Richard McGill published a seminal article exploring the impact of 3 types of practice conditions: blocked, variable, and random practice. They wanted to find out how skill learning in badminton would be affected when practice included different levels of what they called contextual interference. In short, contextual interference can be described as the conditions that replicate the constraints and pressures of the competitive environment. Let's define the 3 types of practice conditions. Blocked practice is an activity that requires the repeated practice of one technique or skill with no variation. An example would be a golf putt from the same distance and the same direction repeated over and over. Research shows that the advantages to this approach are best felt when a participant is learning a brand new technique, and it always leads to short-term improvements in performance. On the other hand, the disadvantages of block practice are that there is a poorer long-term retention of the skill, limited transfer of the skill to a competitive context, no decision making involved, and it can be quite boring for the participant. By contrast, variable practice is an activity that demands one technique or skill being practiced with varying distances, speeds, angles, and lofts, etc. It is ideal for developing and refining skills, allows all parameters of the skill to be developed, and practice becomes more realistic to the game as it encourages players to make decisions on the fly. The disadvantages of this are there will be a lot of mistakes initially, but as we know, mistakes aren't a bad thing. Because of this, learning may appear slower than when using block practice. Lastly, random practice replicates the competitive context of the game and under the pressures of an opposition. This allows practice to be more realistic to the game, makes events unpredictable, and allows a better transfer of learning to competition. However, this can frustrate players if they are unable to succeed in such an environment. Again, the benefits of this approach may be less immediate and appear slower. These different practice types bridge the gap between drill to game, as they indicate that the selection of a practice activity should be dependent on what it is the kids are required to learn and their stage of development. If they need to learn a skill for the first time, then block practice should be used. If they need to use the skill under varying game-like pressures, random game-based practice would be the most appropriate. Regardless of the type of practice you choose, always maximize the doing. It is important to understand that none of these methods are better than others. They simply offer different benefits at different stages of development and for different purposes. And there's nothing stopping you from mixing them up with the same participants and within the same session. It's never either or. Combining the practice type with the proposed behaviours mentioned previously will allow coaches to shape an enjoyable, healthy and nourishing learning environment for participants. Before moving on to the next video, it is good to remind ourselves that emotion drives learning. So, when thinking about what behaviours and pedagogical tools to use, please always bear in mind rule number 5. Prioritise the love of sport above learning sport. In other words, don't let learning get in the way of fun. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.